There is particular concern about the message these incidents send to younger racialized Canadians. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says that's what worries him the most. Justin Trudeau talked about it today as well. Joining me now, 3 university students and 3 young voters who've been watching this story closely. Dilaye Desta, Maham Kaleem, and Mehdi Bouchentouf. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you taking the time. As you're watching this story unfold, what are you thinking? What is the number one thing that you think about when you're seeing this play out?
I know Maham and I discussed this earlier, but we weren't shocked when we saw the picture.
You were not shocked?
No, we weren't shocked.
Why not?
As people of color in this world, it's not really surprising when you see leaders, especially world leaders, who usually are cis, white, able-bodied males who participate in racist practices because of the racist society that we live in. We live in institutions and we grow up with communities that are all founded on, our country was built on colonialism. Our institutions are inherently racist based on the history of how they were created. So for people to then not see issues within their behaviors, such as doing blackface or doing making racist jokes and not seeing the harm in that, it's really not surprising that Justin Trudeau would have participated in that as well.
What about you?
I think, also taking into consideration that this was in 2001. And although we're saying, it's 18 years is not that big of a time, it is when we're talking about social progression and the differentiation of values and cultural norms. We see a lot of talk about white privilege these days. We see a lot of talk about empowerment, inclusion. These terms didn't hold the same value as they do now, right? So in 2001, if somebody's making a joke, a racist joke, for the sake of inducing laughter or to have fun at a party, it's not really that shocking from people that have experienced that as people of color, because we see this happening. What's been interesting is seeing people that have not really experienced that be this shocked and outraged.
And so what do you think when you see that?
I think that
when you see how this is being handled in the media, the coverage in the election campaign and so on, do you think that's a good thing, or do you think this is blown out of proportion, or that it's just this is normalcy and why is everybody playing it up?
Definitely not normalcy.
Okay.
Just because you are used to seeing something does not make it okay, or does not mean that you start to accept that, right? So I think rightly so that people should be angered, people should be mad, but they should think strategically and they need to be smarter than the way the news is portraying this, right? This is also another agenda. Think about the timing that the picture is being dropped. This picture has always been there since 2001. This is not a new photograph. Why is it just now making rounds? Why is it just now inducing this? Oh my God, I can't believe he did this. Okay. There's a strategy behind this, right?
What do you think, Mehdi?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because I thought, for me, I was disappointed in the action itself, but I was also disappointed in the reaction because I thought I felt like a lot of the dialogue wasn't centered on marginalized communities and the impact that they had. I felt like it was Justin Trudeau's not fit for office or Andrew Scheer's, you know what I mean? It was a lot of political dialogue rather than actually talking about the communities, right? It's the fact that not only are you talking about the history of blackface and necessarily what that served as a purpose in society to push away especially communities that were discriminated against from participating in things like theater, actually having access to a lot of institutions. Right. A lot of times these aren't the communities that are actually talking, right? It's the fact that it's other white cis males that necessarily go forward and say, here's my opinion on it. Allow for the communities that were hurt to actually talk about what type of impact it has on them, and also allow for their stories to come forward. Why are we being deplatformed from an action that has actually impacted us the most?
Interesting. So we have at the center of this story is the Liberal leader, Justin Trudeau, and his explanation, he's apologized more than once now, and his explanation today was that at the time he didn't realize it was wrong because of his layers of privilege gave him this massive blind spot to the kind of hurt he was inflicting by wearing blackface. Do you accept that defense?
While I believe that's true, I definitely don't think it's an excuse because there are white people who haven't done blackface. So I believe that using his privilege and his platform by saying that he did grow up, I guess, more privileged than other white males in his life because his father was prime minister, and he did have a much different life, I guess, than the average Canadian citizen. But I personally believe that being ignorant is not an excuse. It's up to you to learn, put in the effort, put in the work to Make sure that if you are claiming to be a leader and speaking up for other marginalized communities, especially because he was a teacher, he was teaching students of color. I do not accept that as to be an excuse, as a blanket all statement to say that because of his station growing up may have shaped how he didn't view race as an issue because it didn't directly affect him. But as an educator, it is your job to make sure that you are shaping young minds, you are being the leader you want to present to these kids.
I have a question, I have a follow-up on that,
Yeah.
if you don't mind. What's the difference then between an excuse and an apology? Just out of curiosity, because I'm definitely on the same page, but the way I perceived it is that I took it as an apology. I haven't seen the second video based off the first video, and what I've been reading about the second apology is that, well, it's something that's done now, right?
Yeah.
So I was happy that he is acknowledging it and that he isn't shying away from kind of accepting that responsibility, because I think we also now live in a time where everything we do is online.
Yes.
And so if you're coming from a less informed place, although I agree, if you're a teacher, it is your job to be more informed.
Yeah.
But let's suppose, okay, you went down that road, you didn't know that. What are you supposed to do in 2019 now to change that? Because you can't change the past. And I think step one is, okay, calling yourself out, admitting that you are less informed, but then step two is actually changing the narrative and changing the dialogue.
And also putting like the spotlight back on, like as you said, those affected, marginalized communities. It doesn't really make
and so
sense.
what do you think of what do you think of, so in this explanation, what he's saying is essentially I've now come to a place where I've learned from this, and I want to build on it and move forward on it. So, do you accept that this is behind him now? That if you know, or what questions do you still have for him? We had a lot today for him. What questions do you still have for him if this issue isn't closed?
For me, I think it's a huge, one of my main concerns with the, like, generally the entire like thing that happened, obviously blackface, but the first thing that came to mind is that why are you waiting for someone else to say you did that, right? Like recently we had the issue in Virginia where, like, I think it was the governor who like was exposed for having done blackface in the past. There is an opportunity for you to come forward and say, I'm going to be completely honest with the electorate. I've done this in the past and I take full responsibility. It's easier for you to actually come forward and say, I am taking the onus and saying I've done it and I will take responsibility.
Rather than waiting for it to hit the news and having to respond to it.
Absolutely, and it's actually known that this picture has been out since 2001. You know that as Prime Minister, not only are you increasingly being scrutinized, but you know that eventually this is going to come out. Why not take the responsibility and bring it forward and bring it to light yourself? Right now, he has absolutely no control over what's being said, and he could have just said it himself and said, look, here's what happened, I completely apologize, and he could have taken actions to fix it, right? We're a month away from the election. He actually can't necessarily create policy now that would like fix the racial issues that exist. He had 4 years to do so. He should have come forward and said, look, here's an issue with my privilege, here's how I'm gonna address it, and I'm gonna take the onus and create policy that positively impacts these communities, whereas he's waiting until 1 month before it got exposed. He has no mechanism to fix it because he's probably not gonna be Prime Minister in October.
Does this change your view of this man as the Prime Minister of the country?
I personally, I don't want to say that this incident is going to change how I'm planning on voting, because as much as it sucks for other people to hear, but I don't think he's the only political leader we've had in our country who has done blackface. If anything, I would bet good money that 95% of the people, members of Parliament and the Senate, have also engaged in racist jokes, racist caricatures, you know, even just, you know, casual everyday racist remarks. I would not be surprised, and because of that, I don't want to let the future of our country be affected by this. As I just want this to be a learning point and a way for, especially for young voters, to keep in mind, as young people, especially people who are studying social sciences, we understand, like structurally and institutionally, that capitalist Western society that we live in now is going to be shaped by a lot of like racist, subtle ideals. And because of that, we know that we cannot change those until we decide to, you know, at least have hope and push forward and pick people who have good policies. I'm not voting for Trudeau, I'm voting for the platform.
Yeah, I think it's really a smart way to view, to disassociate certain people from party ideology. I think you need to do that because it's a very luxurious choice to ask somebody, are you going to vote for a certain person or not based on a racist remark they did? this is too common of an instance for ethnic minorities who are struggling with racism, who are struggling with institutional racism, these blockages, to just say, oh, I'm offended, so I'm not going to do that. We can't afford to. It's too simplistic.
Let me finish on this quickly. Is that so? What can some benefit come from this?
I think, like, firstly, I think one of the biggest concerns I have is that we're also treating minorities as like a monolith, right? It's the fact that we say we're looking to get the minority vote, right? Like, not every minority thinks in the same way. They obviously have different ways they can go about things. For me, on my personal choice, I'm living in a riding which has always been like liberal NDP, where like the majority of young people still aren't sure, and this is Ottawa Centre, where they're necessarily going to go like with the NDP or with the Liberals, because it flip-flops, right? And I think those are the type of ridings that like will negatively impact like the Liberals, because like it's going to be a really close race. So it might not 100% change the way I'm going to vote, but it's definitely going to be in consideration, because like I didn't find the apology to be sufficient. Like he took responsibility for I think 2 of them, and then a third one came out. Like, why weren't you just clear about it from the beginning? About what had occurred, at least my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, we would have a lot more to talk about, and we'll see if to your points, we broaden the conversation in this election campaign to issues that have flown up because of this, that have come to the surface because of this, and not just the videos and the old photos, right? The broader issues. Thank you, all 3 of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.